I've had that from folks. I've had some folks who are really hardcore evangelicals say to me, well, as a Christian leader, the Bible tells us that Christian leaders will be judged more severely than anybody else when they finally get to heaven. And so you better be careful what you're teaching them people. It's a heavy mantle being a pastor sometimes. Because I believe that we are responsible for what we preach and for what we teach. But I'm convinced more and more that what Jesus attempted to do in his life was not just to call those who were religiously wrong, but rather that his ministry was always to the ones who were religiously wrong, to the ones who were on the margins of society. And much as Paul, who tried to, I guess in some ways, to find a way to bring back those folks who were on the religious right and pulling them back to the center, I do believe that Paul tried to carry on that ministry of Jesus to enable those who continued to be on the fringe of society to find hope in the Christ who had walked amongst them that day. That's good news. It's good news for you and for me who have been so often excluded from the powerhouses of this world. It's good news for you and me who are looking to work on the margins of society. Because I truly believe that when we're on the margins, that is where Jesus is. I don't believe that Jesus is at the center of anything. I believe that Jesus is on the margins of our world and is calling the world to the margins. Because where the margins are is really where Jesus is. On the side of the poor. On the side of the disenfranchised, on the side of those who have been persecuted, on the side of those who have been the victims of domestic violence, on the side of those who have been raped of all of their self-worth. That is where Jesus is today. And in this radically inclusive gospel, you and I get to pick up where Jesus left off. And to be on the side of the poor. If MCC ever becomes respectable, we should shut our doors. If MCC ever becomes mainstream Christianity, we should shut our doors. If MCC ever becomes anything more than the radically inclusive place that we are trying to create together and to confront the places of hypocrisy in our world, then we have failed in the reformation of the Christian church today. I truly believe that MCC's vision and passion for the 21st century is to be the reforming church. The reforming Christian church that will bring Christianity one more time to the side of Jesus Christ himself. If that is true, then we're going to have to not only wade in water, we're going to have to trouble the water. Because we're going to have to trouble some of the religious hypocrisy that continues to exist, not only in other places, but also in our own communities of faith. The religious hypocrisy that says only, even amongst our own community, that says only certain people are welcome in. That only certain people are able to gain access to power within our own denomination. That if we're really going to trouble the water, if we're really going to wade in that water, then we're going to have to spend some time listening to one another and the stories of our own lives. I said last week, once we were lost, now we're found. Once I was blind, now I see. I heard that through Pamela this morning. And I heard it through Reverend Barbara as she sang Wading in the Water, a story that has incredible significance for our African American history. But a story that encourages you and me to wade in that water this morning and to be like Paul. Not to embrace the ways of the world, not to say that the ways of the world are always right, but to know that the folks in our world are wading and looking for people like you and I to bring them some hope and some salvation. Some hope and some salvation. And that means that we're going to have to be some theologically incorrect people for a while. politically incorrect, mystically correct people, enabling folks to find hope in the water that we are creating in this community of faith. It's troubled water. I know that because there are a lot of people who don't like us. But they didn't like Jesus either. And so I feel like we're in good company this morning. Troubling the water. I cannot deny the experience of Jesus Christ in the lives and the stories of the folks who continue to cross the threshold of my office and talk about the transforming power and grace of God, not always articulated in the theology that I understand, but articulated in a theology that makes sense to them, and that's good enough for me as it was for Paul, because together we find the theologies of who God is and how God works God's self out in the world. I don't have to agree theologically with you in order to be in worship with you. And you do not have to theologically agree with me in order to be in worship with me. We just have to agree that God is present. And where God is present, their spirit shows up and reveals the wholeness of truth. Even if you dislike the way I preach, heaven forbid. Even if you dislike the way I live, don't tell me. We're called to be the body of Christ and to know that the Spirit is present. That's what makes this place unique, I believe. That's what makes this place so special, I believe. We are religious troublemakers. Religious troublemakers. And we are troubling the water because our lives, not everybody perhaps in this room, but our lives are contrary to what the religious people would think that is acceptable to Jesus Christ. That makes you a religious troublemaker. I can just see you tomorrow morning back at your office. My preacher told me I'm a religious troublemaker. And as a religious troublemaker, I have the freedom enough in my experience to sit with my sister and brother and to hear their story. Not to judge it, not to discount it, not to say that it's not valid and your experience isn't right, but a religious troublemaker enough to embrace the wholeness and the inclusiveness of a God who is way beyond my understanding and way beyond any one of our understandings. That is the radically inclusive gospel that Jesus begins his ministry with and Paul picks up in the church at Corinth, where he says, I became all things to all people. I walked in their journey. I became like them. I didn't necessarily live like them, but I became with them, walked with them, journeyed with them. The Corinthian people were not a good people. Now, when they got to 2 Corinthians, they were much better. But in 1 Corinthians, they were not a good people. I'm always glad when Paul comes back and tells us of that transforming power of a people. And I want to tell you, sisters and brothers, sometimes when I look at the folks who are here in church on Sundays, and I know your stories, and I've heard your stories, and I'm honored to those stories, I see how that transforming grace has worked its way in your life.